11:30. I want to welcome all the members, the Minister and the Provincial Treasury team that are with us today. And I think today we're going to be receiving a briefing on the PRO and the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook, as well as the first quarter performance for the 25-26 year. I think just for purposes of the record, I'm going to give the members an opportunity just to introduce themselves, followed then by the Minister and the HOD and the team that is with us today. I'm Leon van Wyk. I'm the Chair of the Budget Committee. I'm just going to the members here in the House, and then we'll go on to the online platform.
Morning, Chairperson, morning, colleagues, and morning to the professionals. I'm Member Boyson, and I'm an alternate member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Lecter. I'm an alternate. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Thomas Walters. I'm Chair of the Standing Committee for Premier and Constitutional Development.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Johnson, alternate member of this committee.
Good day, everyone. Wendy Kaiser-Philander, alternate to this committee.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Benedicta van Minnen, a member of this committee.
Thank you. I'm now going to go online. There are a number of the permanent members of the committee who are in veto ahead of a public hearing to take place later today. And I know there are a number of other members that are also online.
Mr. Chair, my name is Nomin Konzo. I'm a member of the committee.
Thanks, Chair. Dave Bryant, member of the committee and chairperson of Environment.
Morning, Chair and colleagues. Basil Petrus, member of this committee.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Morning, Chairperson.
Okay,
Morning,
who's next?
Can I go, Chair?
You can go.
Morning, Chairperson. My name is Noko Masipa. I am a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Beauty Stoffel and I'm a member of the committee.
Good day, Chairperson. Grant Marie, and I'm an alternate member of this committee. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson. Derek Wessels, the Chairperson of Infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair Kozama Chapong.
That looks like the full quota of members who are online. I'm going to hand over to you, Minister Bartman, and to HOD.
Thank you so much, Deirdre Bartman, Minister of Finance.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Tulanda Gantana, Head of the Department.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Victor Sunna, DDG Fiscal and Economic Services. Morning, Chair and members. Malcolm Boyson for Public Policy Services.
Good morning, Taryn van der Rede, Head of the Budget Office.
Good morning, everyone. Philippus Prinsloo, Coordinator of the PERA and author of Chapter 1.
Good morning, Annalise Pick, Provincial Government Finance.
Good morning, Faisal Nuruddin, Department of the Premier.
Charles Barnard, Department of the Premier, Provincial Data Office.
Good morning, I'm Paul Pino, Business Information and Data Management, Provincial Treasury.
Morning, Chad Capon, part of the Provincial Government Budget Policy Office team.
Good morning, everyone. Celeste Minter from the Provincial Government Budget Office.
Morning, everyone. Luzanne Lesh, Provincial Government Budget Office.
Good morning, all. Jonathan Hendricks, also from the Provincial Government Budget Office.
Thank you for that. This meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube. I'm going to hand over to you, Minister, to make introductory remarks or for HOD also to make introductory remarks, and then we can continue with a briefing on the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook for 2025. And then following that briefing, we will grant the members an opportunity then to ask any questions or to make any comments on the review. And then after that, we'll move on to the next briefing.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not gonna make introductory remarks specifically. I'm sure everyone is don't want to listen to me for over the hour that I spoke. But just to mention that there are some new innovations in the PERO. We've included extra information on energy, both generation and distribution in the PERO this year, as well as in terms of impact of G4J and some additional information on items such as female and child-headed households amongst the various different types of innovations. But I'm going to ask the team to take us through all of the technical details and information that we've included for everyone. And I'm hoping that this really will be a document that people can use to be able to inform planning, budgeting, oversight, and so forth. And I'm proud of the team for being able to do something like this. It's a world-class document that we wrote in-house. So I'm very proud of the team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. Before we actually kickstart the presentation, just to indicate to the committee that for us, the PERO is more than just data. It offers insights, foresight, and it lays a foundation for informed decision-making. So in a time of global uncertainty, understanding our own economic landscape is critical. So the review captures the pulse of our provincial economy. It highlights key trends, challenges, as well as opportunities that will define our path moving forward. Through the analysis, the collaborative input, the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook, in our view, equips policymakers, potential investors, and communities with the knowledge needed to drive inclusive growth, resilience, and innovation. And it reflects the Western Cape government's commitment to transparency, evidence-based planning, and shared prosperity. With that, Chair, it's going to be the team will then take us through the presentation. Taryn, okay.
Thank you, HOD. So we'll do a tag team between Philippus and myself. So this year, we've taken a little bit of a different approach in terms of how we're presenting the PERO this year. So generally, we brought to the Budget Committee our chapter-by-chapter analysis. This year, we're trying to just highlight what those key findings and trends are, also highlighting what those key anomalies are and what the cross-referencing is when you actually look at the data across the various chapters. So when looking at the overall 2025 PERO key findings, we're firstly highlighting the fact that there's economic stagnation, fiscal strain, and sluggish outlook. And this is really clear, and Philip will speak to this a little bit more in terms of where we're seeing with regards to South Africa's growth rate only standing at 0.7% per annum in terms of the average over the past decade. So really looking at where we can start to identify opportunities in order to strengthen our economic growth nationally. Then you'll start to see, as part of our presentation, is this trend towards deindustrialization of South Africa, where there's a shift from manufacturing towards the finance sector. Here, we're also highlighting the implications in terms of employment creation and also looking at certain supply chain disruptions across the various value chains that's affected. Then what's also coming out quite strongly is the implications of the US import tariff hikes. So nationally, we're starting to see implications in terms of the motor vehicle exports, largely as a result of the share of motor vehicle exports compared to other exports in terms of South Africa, but also with regards to the overall value of the commodity itself. And then with the Western Cape in particular, also seeing implications for the agriculture sector as a result of these increasing tariffs. Then we're also seeing some emerging trends with regards to the Western Cape district anomalies against the rural districts, where we're actually seeing the rural districts starting to outperform the Cape Metro. And so, as per usual, you will still see the Cape Metro contributing the greatest proportion to GDP. But you're starting to see a trend coming up now with regards to rural districts actually peaking in terms of their growth trends compared to the Cape Metro. Then with regards to the labor market, you're starting to see interesting dynamics coming up here, with unemployment still being the lowest in the Western Cape compared to other provinces. While we acknowledge that it's the lowest compared to other provinces, internationally it's still high, or compared to international standards, it's still high. And we're also seeing interesting statistics coming up in terms of employment absorption trends across various education levels. Then also interesting is the demographic shifts, where you're seeing a reshaping with regards to family structures and societal roles. In particular, this was also mentioned within Minister's speech, is the roles of females, a decline in terms of our fertility rates, but also an uptake in terms of women-held households. Then with regards to migration patterns and population patterns more generally, you're seeing an increase in the population growth trends with regards to the Western Cape, but also in terms of the overall structure with regards to the age categories, you're seeing the elderly starting to increase within our population trends. Then, as you're all aware, we also included the LEAP initiative, or implemented it within the Western Cape, and you're starting to see positive trends within those areas where LEAP was implemented. But we'll also speak more to that in the later slides. And then lastly, with regards to health and education, these departments remain under significant pressure, but also due to their own innovative initiatives, we're starting to see improvements within the health and education space. With those key findings, I'll hand over to Philip to take you through the macro and micro data.
Okay, thank you, Taryn. So we looked at the South African economy over the past decade per sector. That figure there shows the cumulative growth over 10 years, as well as the contribution of each of the sectors in percentage points. This shows us that South Africa as an economy grew by only 7% over the decade, or 0.7% per annum. That is not nearly enough for our population growth, which were at 14.9%. As a result, our GDP per capita declined over the past decade, making us essentially poorer. The finance sector made a significant contribution, as you can see on the figure there, of 5.9 percentage points of the 7% growth, while the construction sector performed the worst, declining by almost a third. And this is probably a reflection on the weak investment sentiment in the country, public sector inefficiencies, and port and road deterioration and load shedding. Supporting statistics to this declining construction sector is also a real value decline in building plans of 40.8% and a decline in the value of buildings completed by 44.6%. We can also see the sectors there that declined in the past decade: construction, manufacturing, mining, are all responsible for job creation for the unskilled and semi-skilled labor force. The result of this weak growth put fiscal pressures on the Western Cape government. Over the past decade, our budget grew in real terms by only 0.9%. And when we look at the past 5 years, on average, it declined by 0.3%. This is a significant challenge since with population growth, frontline services, the budget for frontline services should actually increase way more than inflation. As a result, we expect the South African economy to grow at 0.7% this year and 1.3% next year, while the Western Cape will grow at 0.8% this year and also 1.3% next year. We also look at the sectors, the share of the sectors over the past 20 years, and found that the mining and manufacturing's share in the economy declined significantly by 3.1 percentage points each. Now, this decline of the manufacturing sector points to a phenomenon called deindustrialization, and that is when developing countries lose their manufacturing base at lower income levels than developed economies. We can also see that the finance sector basically took up that share with an increase of 6.6 percentage points. Now, the reason for this deindustrialization is mainly because of dismantling protections like tariffs, but also a loss in competitiveness, especially to countries like China, mainly due to our rigid labor laws, excessive electricity price hikes, load shedding, and poor port and rail infrastructure. So the real risk here is that manufacturing actually got a greater ripple effect when compared to services sectors. And it means that our economy is performing below potential, as well as the number of jobs that would have been created in the manufacturing and mining sector for the semi to low skilled workforce. So the US basically just reversed that policy we adopted in the 1990s, and they started to increase the tariffs this year, and this will have an impact on our exports. We try to measure the extent to which this tariff hike would have on our exports. We can see that the national economies in the red bars there are much more exposed in terms of motor vehicles, which 12.7% of our motor vehicles are exported to the US. While the Western Cape is more exposed in agricultural products and the manufacturing sector in general. On the right-hand side, we try to measure in the 1 quarter where the 10% tariff was implemented, the effect of the tariff. It's still early, but we compared it to the same quarter the previous year. So the main risk there for the national economy is motor vehicle exports, which declined by 54.9% compared to the previous quarter last year. And this had an impact on our total exports. It made a 1.4 percentage point contribution to the 3.5% decline in exports for that quarter. It seems like other commodities like citrus and textiles were not that sensitive to a 10% price hike, but a 30% might be have a different effect. Just looking at the Western Cape district anomalies, on the left-hand side, we've got the GDP growth rate for each district. Although the Cape Metro remains the economic hub of the Western Cape and contributes 72.3% to our GDP, it expanded by only 6.6% over the last decade, the lowest among all districts, while the Overberg district recorded the fastest growth at 15.8%. Also to note that all the rural districts' average growth was at 12.3%, almost double the Cape Metro GDP growth. Also to note that there's certain rural districts that would have been severely affected by the recession in the agricultural sector the past 2 years, and those would include the West Coast and Central Karoo. On the right-hand side, this low GDP growth is culminating into employment opportunities and therefore the unemployment rate. We see unique unemployment patterns in the Western Cape. In the rest of South Africa, normally there's higher unemployment rates in rural districts where the metro have lower unemployment rates. In the Western Cape, the low unemployment rate is in the rural districts. So the Cape Metro had the highest unemployment rate at 25.2%, and it also deteriorated the most over the past decade by 3 percentage points, while the Cape Winelands had the lowest unemployment rate at 13.5%. Rural districts' average unemployment rate was at 17.3% in 2024, also still lower than the Cape Metro. On the left-hand side, we see the labour force growth of the Western Cape. We can see that the labour force of the Western Cape grew at almost double that of South Africa, which means that we need to create so much more employment opportunities for this growing labour force. The labour force also changed to more African, female, and older as well as more educated cohorts. Here we must remember that South Africa is in the process of deindustrialization, which means more jobs in the services sector, which means that we would need a more educated labor force. However, there's also a process of mechanization. In Chapter 2, the last 5 years, there was increased mechanization in the agricultural sector, and that most probably led to a decline in labor used in the agricultural sector over that period. Just to note that the labor force of the less than secondary educated cohort declined by 6.9% between the first quarters of 2020 and 2025. On the right-hand side, we measured the growth in the labor force and how much of that growing labor force over the 5 years was absorbed into employment. And we can see that the bulk of employment opportunities was taken up by the secondary educated in the African and colored cohorts or previous advantaged groups. They took 64.3% of all new jobs created the past 5 years. We can also see there that the labor force declined in all the population, among all the population groups, for the less than secondary educated cohorts. And now I'm going to hand over to Darren. Thank you, Darren.
Thanks, Philip. So just in terms of closing off the presentation, we're just going to shift over to the socioeconomic dynamics. So our Chapter 5 really sketches out the broader framework in terms of the shifts and patterns with regards to the socioeconomic data. As I was saying, as part of our introductory remarks, what came out as quite interesting was the rapid decline with regards to our fertility rates in the Western Cape, which is at 1.7% or 1.79 between 2021 and 2026. And this is compared to 2.27 in 2001 and 2006. So this statistic is quite interesting because when fertility levels actually get below the 2 mark, you will be able to start seeing the shifts and changes in structures with regards to your overall population. And here, a lot of the reasons for this decrease in the fertility rates is because females are now seeing greater access to contraceptives. They're making different financial choices, as well as also experiencing work pressures and therefore making these types of decisions. And then also another interesting point that came out of our pedo analysis, as I was saying, is the increase in Western Cape households headed by females. So this increased by 1.4 percentage points since 2015 to 39.7% in 2024. Some of the common reasons that we are accounting for here is due to the widowhood in terms of females, separation and divorce that has now increased by stats, as well as migration of male partners for work reasons, and then also females actually making the choice for independence. Next slide. Then in terms of our overall population shifts and changes within the Western Cape, we're seeing significant growth in the population stats for the province with an increase of 18% between 2016 and 2025, and that's second only to Gauteng. What we do need to note as the Western Cape government is by 2035, the province would need to absorb an additional 1.127 million residents. And this will have significant pressure in terms of the Western Cape government or demand for Western Cape government services, particularly with regards to infrastructure, roads, as well as housing. And then also in terms of another interesting demographic shift is the change in the overall age cohorts with regards to our population. What we're seeing is a decrease in the share of children between 2016 and 2025 from 24.3% to 21.6%. And then when shifting over to youth, you're seeing the share of youth decreasing from 35.4% in 2016 to 32% in 2025. On the other hand, you're seeing an increase in terms of our elderly population in 2016, marked at 9.7%, and then increasing to 12.3% in 2025. So what you're overall seeing is that there's a shift with regards to our youth, an increase with regards to our elderly, and that's also overall looking at the dynamics with regards to the increase in pressure that's now putting on our working age population. Then largely with regards to our increase in population trends within the Western Cape is largely due to a net in-migration. And again, we're second highest after Gauteng between 2021 and 2026. And largely this is as a result of an inflow coming in from the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. Next slide. Okay, then shifting over to our crime stats. More generally, since 2015, the murder rate per 100,000 people increased by 31.5% percentage points to 60.6 murders per 100,000 people in the Western Cape. And this is compared to over the same period with regards to the rest of South Africa, which only increased by 12.6 percentage points to 41.6 percentage points with regards to murders per 100,000 people. So murder rate still remains a key concern for us as a Western Cape government. And then when looking more broadly in terms of our crime stats, murder offences increases by 14%. Sexual offences remain stagnant at 0 percentage points over this period of time. And then burglary decreased by 31.4%. Drug-related incidents decreased by 11%, and then driving under the influence also decreased by 24.9%. Then the Provincial Treasury, in partnership with our department or DPOX, did the comparison in terms of our LEAP initiative. So did a comparison in terms of before and after we deployed LEAP, but relative to the crime rates to the rest of the Western Cape when you compare it to those LEAP deployed areas. So where you're seeing a significant change is the reduction in terms of the murder rate with regards to 3.8%, a decrease in terms of robbery and residential premises at 3.5%, sexual offences declining by 1.6 percentage points. But what still remains a key concern for us more broadly in terms of the Western Cape is that the Western Cape accounts for 90% of SA's gang-related murders, which we've all seen coming through quite broadly in terms of what's currently coming out in the media recently. Then with regards to health and education, as previously stated, these departments remain under significant pressures, but due to their innovations, we've seen an improvement with regards to their trends. So public ordinary school enrollment increased by 15.3% in 2015 to over 1.135 million in 2024. And you're starting to see as a result of this increase in the enrollment, it has a direct implication in terms of learner-teacher ratios, which has also increased between the periods of 2015 and 2025. However, based on this increase in learner-teacher ratios, the Department of, or the Western Cape Education Department has also implemented the Rapid School Build program, which assisted to add 17 additional schools since 2023. Then similarly, so with regards to our health department, public health care patient service by our Department of Health increased by 17.4 million. And then in terms of home and community-based services, this also improved by 32.8%, and central dispensing units also improved by 11.5%. And so based on these innovative methods put in by the Department of Health, you're now starting to see a decline of 15.5% in terms of facility-based primary health care. So therefore, just overall showing with regards to our frontline service departments, we are trying to see, or we're starting to see an improvement with regards to the innovations that they're putting in place. And with that said, I'm going to hand over to my HOD for the concluding remarks.
Thank you to Taryn and the team. Just in conclusion, today's newspaper is yesterday's news. The Pero breaks new ground by providing beyond short-term, by looking beyond short-term noise to focus on enduring trends. It merges insights from global to regional levels into a single clear report using innovative methods and visuals to provide appropriate context in which the Western Cape government operates. So updated with the latest economic developments and data, it also equips, as I've already indicated, policymakers with a comprehensive toolkit. Lasting change depends on government action, and the Pero empowers government to make that transformation. There's some new features, and I think the presenters already touched on it, that we are showcasing here in terms of our 2025 Pero, which includes the reflection on social services, which then also looks at diversion programs, child protection, and services for older persons. It also introduces a new platform to present information, including video content, which we'll share immediately after the presentation. It focuses on statistical anomalies between district and the metro and labor absorption, measures the initial impact of increased US tariffs, used improved methods to gauge policy impact, for instance, LEAP as well as the G4J policy on the economy. So the aim is for the Pero to continue to evolve into a document that really strives to measure the direct impact of government policies and projects, with a growing focus on adding data that can be used to guide budget decisions and entertain ideas toward bold policy initiatives as we move forward. Thank you, Chair. Are we playing the video? We were really hoping that this was going to work.
That's working online. I saw that already.
Yeah, so
We'll send the
I
link.
think we can.
Or try afterwards.
Okay. That's it, Chi. Maybe.
Yes, we'll just try again to be able to get the sound.
Residents of the Western Cape, ever wondered how we're really doing as a province? The 2025 Provincial Economic Review and Outlook tells that story. It's more than stats. It's the lived reality of our people, shaped by macroeconomic constraints and provincial resilience. Let's start with the big picture. Over the past decade, the South African economy expanded.
Chair, may I ask, because of the mics and things in the chamber, it seems that there's a bit of an echo. I did see earlier that it was uploaded, so maybe we must either try again after questions and answers or just forward the link to the committee. I don't want to hold up the engagement. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's a good idea. We'll try again shortly. So we'll take questions at this stage, and then hopefully the technical people can come up with a good solution for us here in the meantime. So I'm looking for hands. I wonder if I could just ask procedural officer. I see in the middle of the screen there we've got. If you can just take away that little, because it's probably covering a couple of members. You can see them on your side. Okay, so I think I'm looking for hands here. I see Member Nkondlo, I see Member Lacquer. Okay, we'll go with Member Nkondlo and then Member Lacquer to start with, and then I see there's a third hand as well, and we'll deal with you just now. Okay, Member Nkondlo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to the Minister and her team, and let us appreciate the presentation as it has been made. I'm interested to understand the phenomenon explained in both the minister's speech in the House and also in the presentation, particularly what is the meaning of the conclusion made regarding the move from the manufacturing or deindustrialization, I think, as the colleague was mentioning, of the economy to finance. And if you consider that, and also in the provincial economy, what would be the benefit thereof, especially in the growth for jobs, sort of high level intentions. And one raises this with the understanding that in the Q2 labor force survey, the finance sector recorded a substantial employment losses that shed about 45,243 jobs in the province, with the city of Cape Town registering almost 40,000 of those and others in the non-metro. And indeed, the finance sector has been understood to be the biggest sector in the country, and I think more prominent in the province. But part of one thing I want to understand is its labor market absorption, especially because it tends to attract more high-end, high-skilled, of those that are graduates, specialists, and others. Whilst we know with data that the majority of those that are unemployed are mainly in the levels of less than matric. That is where you find most of the unemployment. So that is what I'm trying to understand in my head, and I'm sure colleagues can then further explain this move. I'm not sure. Is the problem? Chair?
Member Nkondlo, I think we're just checking to see if someone else has got their mic on to cause that echo. Okay, I think the procedural officer has been trying to deal with that. Okay, so you can go ahead, Member Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. So that was just my first question of trying to understand that point in both the minister's speech and also in the presentation. The second question I have, Chair, is that Minister spoke about a multi-pronged approach with the whole of society around, dealing with the issue of crime and murder, which is something that I think we also agree on. It's been ventilated much of the time in the House, as it relates to also including violence prevention, measures. Now, I'm trying to understand from Minister is that with the PERO at this point, because what the minister's speech highlighted was the contribution of the LEAP. And sometimes in the presentation made, the LEAP contribution is always presented in isolation of what the minister in their own speech made reference to, which is the intergovernmental approach of the efforts of national, provincial, and local government. That actually LEAP contribution cannot be viewed in isolation, because until they can demonstrate that if you were to remove everything else and you only put LEAP, that would actually be the solution to violence prevention in these hot spots. So I thought I wanted to make that point, Chair. And then my last question for this round would be on the city of Cape Town, because I heard the colleague, I didn't understood well, perhaps they can explain, that they say the city of Cape Town would have registered a lower growth than the non-metro, if I picked up. And if so, can the colleagues maybe indicate or provide to us
near 0.7%?
What would have been the drivers, or what exactly could be explained as the reason behind, other non-metro municipalities, growing at a better rate than the city of Cape Town, if indeed that is what they were meaning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Kondo. We'll move over to Member Lacker.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, mine is necessarily around the impact of growth for jobs. If you're looking at page 11 on the slide, which talks to the learner-teacher ratio, and if you're looking at that, Chair, there is an indication, but also a projection of 1:36 in a classroom. And now I'm trying to make a contrast in line with other provinces, because if you're looking at this, normally a teacher ratio would be from 30 to 34. But in the Western Cape, there is a projection of 30 to 36. And I want to understand, Chair, what is then the impact of the idea of growth for jobs, particularly in this slide? But also, Chair, if you would look at what the IMF says pertaining to the teacher ratio, it's between 30 and 31. So I'm really interested as to what then becomes the role on the concept of growth for jobs. But also, if you're looking at that, Chair, also, you would have noted that in 2015, it was 1:30. And between 2015 and 2024, it grew to 1:34. So for me, I want to understand exactly the drivers of that and what are the interventions that the Western Cape Department of Education would then employ in this case. Then going furthermore on this, Chair, would have been the issue of the increase of the learner intake from 983,000 to 1.1 or over 1.1 million. And I want to get an understanding exactly where are these extra or additional classrooms were added. And did that make any difference to the learner-teacher ratio? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lacker. We're then going on to the online platform, Member Stoffel.
Thank you, Chairperson. Am I audible, Chair?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, let me appreciate the presentation from the MEC and her department. Let me start with the input of the MEC. MEC, you have indicated there's new innovations. Officer person should appreciate for that. Show appreciation for that. And that innovations is in various aspects, on various aspects. Let me go to the industrialization. You have touched there, the presentation touched there on Pardon me if my reference might be wrong, but the presentations do have touch on households. And you have indicated in the presentation that most of the household these days is being managed by females. And your presentation doesn't indicate whether that females that is working or not. And then since that households now, the most households is being managed by females, what provision? Because I didn't see any innovation when it comes to assist those type of females, or to create innovation ways for those females to accompany their responsibility. Because even in terms of the jobs that is being mentioned here, we didn't hear really about the improvement of jobs since the last quarter. We just heard about decrease, but what other innovations is there since we are faced with the crisis that we are faced on the province? Then the second question is that in terms of the emerging trends in the districts, yes, we agreed, but why that trend stop with the districts? The rural municipalities doesn't benefit within that programs, whatever program is there. So how are the MEC going to address that issue so that each and every district is fulfilling their duties towards each and every municipality within rural areas or wherever where when it comes to economical development? Because within the beginning, your department have indicated together with the Mr. Mayor that there will be a concentration on economical development. And as far as we can see now, this thing is only been done to districts, but it doesn't cascade to the actual place where it's supposed to go. Then the last question is that in terms of a rapid school building program, we are sitting with overcrowded schools within rural areas as we speak. As the MEC, do you really think that 17 additional schools since 2023 till now, it's enough? And if you think it's not enough, why we are standing on 17? Because currently you are we are faced in our rural areas with overcrowded schools, children that can't really fulfill the actual pass rate because the classrooms is too full, there's too many disturbance for that kid. And even if you look into the MEC of Education, when he mentioned where these 17 schools is going to be built, it's more areas where there's already a lot of schools, but within the rural areas there's no schools. But I believe you will tell me at the end of the day that one the minister must tell me, the MEC of Education. But in terms of the budget for this, I'm asking, do MEC think the 17 schools is really enough for this crisis that we are sitting in terms of education? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Laka. I see Member Masipa and then Member Murray, and then after that we'll hand over to the department to give some responses, and then hopefully we can give them a commercial break on the video at that stage. Okay, to you, Member Masipa.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Minister, HOD, and your colleagues, HOD. for the presentation. Chair, mine is very quick. On slide number 1, which is number 2, with regards to the point that was made relating to emerging trends that are reflecting that the Western Cape district anomalies with rural districts outperforming Cape Metro. The question I have is that this obviously is the focus, the report here contained reflecting only the district municipalities, or does it reflect, is it a reflection of the rest of the municipalities within the particular districts? And maybe, you know, if a minister can share which ones are really shooting the lights, and what are the economic drivers with those particular municipalities that are shooting the lights out, just for us to be able to kind of learn lessons, you know, take lessons out of what they are doing in those particular municipalities that can really be something to help us understand from a policy perspective. The second one really relates to, I think that's slide number 2. Sorry, slide number 3. Slide number 3 talks about the growth population, and obviously our population growth versus national, which is at 7%, and obviously we are sitting with 14.9%. Also in that slide, there is a talk about, you know, finance sector making a huge contribution, which also you talk about made largest contribution of 5.9% points. But then when I go to slide number 4, it talks about between 2005 2024, there was a shift towards finance of plus 6.6 percentage points. I just want to get an understanding as to when it comes to slide number 3, that largest contribution of 5.9, is it are we reflecting the annual, meaning, you know, 2015, 2024, as per your slide heading there that talks to that? And also I see, because the other one is talks to 2005, 2024. No, I'm covered with that one, so there is no question there. The last one is going to be on the city of Cape Town in terms of unemployment being very high. I think maybe just the question is, what are the real factors that makes the Cape Metro being the highest in unemployment in comparison to the rest at 25.2, which is slide number 6, whereas, you know, is also, you know, the biggest economic contributor at 72.3%. Just if maybe, you know, Minister and the HOD can just share with us what are some of the taking from these numbers, you know, what's really happening that we can really take note of that contribute to this high unemployment in the city of Cape Town, comparing it to the rural district. Thanks, Chair. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Over to you, Member Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and the department. I just wanted to know, in terms of the data that's been provided, Chair, has the department also looked into, when they put together this PERO, looked into the diversification that is required by the Western Cape's agricultural sector, that will have to be looked at in order to ensure long-term sustainability and growth, in light of the possible AGOA impact if that ends, and also our tariffs of 30% that has now been forced on us by the USA. And then, Mr. Chair, I also just want to know, in terms of the jobs that have been created, do we go as far as to break down those jobs to permanent jobs, temporary jobs, just in terms of long-term and short-term creation of employment, or what percentage of them are just EPWP, related jobs? I think that is important to also consider. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to ask anything after this. Just in terms of the Western Cape becoming an aging population, do we go as far as to distinguish between state-dependent pensioners versus private non-state dependent pensioners? That particular split, just in terms of forward planning, in terms of infrastructure that will be required, etc. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Murray. I see Member Walters' hand is up. I think we'll stop after you then, Member Walters, for this round of questions.
Yeah, I think mine's actually fairly straightforward. If you look at the description of what job drivers are, it's essentially the value chains in manufacturing. It's the biggest and the widest job creator. And if you look at the sectors that seem to be fairly robust, they're all historically strong sectors in the Western Cape, dating back, in the case of the financial sector, 150 years ago. Agriculture is relatively to the rest of, there are some exceptions, but relative to the rest of the country, we have a fairly sophisticated, also in international standards, agricultural sector that has X amount of absorption, and I suspect that also explains the difference between the Cape Metro and your rural parts. So in order to, two questions, in order to drive economic growth and absorbing jobs, job absorbing economic growth, what can the Western Cape government do, given that especially things like the LEZs in Saldanha Bay industrial policy is a national competency? What can the Western Cape do to facilitate a manufacturing industry there? I think it will require either a combination of pressure or cooperation with national government, but it would be interesting to hear what the thoughts are there. And to what extent does tourism substitute for, call it a fairly incipient manufacturing sector in terms of what is required? To what extent, where does tourism fit into the picture? But it boils down to, for me, there's rapid, if we look at it purely in terms of the Western Cape, and if we assume the Western Cape has to deal with or unable to deal with problems in the rest of the country and have to take full ownership of it, what can the Western Cape do to drive enormous manufacturing growth in the Western Cape?
So I'm going to hand over to Minister and then HOD, and I imagine you're going to allocate the tasks.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I'll try my best to deal with some of the high-level items, and where it drills down to detail, I'll hand over to the team. Just some few general remarks. So the difference between the PERO and what will be the MTBPS and the budget is that your PERO is first, obviously, your tabling of your data and your evidence, which follows with your MTBPS, which is your statement of intent in terms of where you're going, in terms of the provincial economy and the budget. and finances. And then the main budget is obviously the budget in response to what are you doing forward, what are you prioritizing, what are you deprioritizing, what are you scaling, what is the impact. And what the PARO aims to do is, in order to assist with that planning, assist with that budgeting, so that when departments do come to the budget process, is that are we using official data to inform our decisions? Are we using relevant data? Are we using useful data? So the aim of the PARO is to be able to assist us in this regard. I also just want to mention that the MARO will also be tabled, the Municipal Economic Review and Outlook. So while generally we will speak about districts, and that includes the respective municipalities under that particular district. So when we speak about district in the PARO, it's not necessarily the district municipality, it's the whole district with all of its municipalities included. And in the PARO, what we do is we then go and break it down according to the different municipalities and how they are achieving various different things. So it's not that we're not going to publish it, we just publish it at different intervals of the respective year. In terms of the period under review, I just want to mention this because I think there's a number of different questions that actually relates to the period under review. So this particular PARO's period is Q1 of 2020 to Q1 of 2025. And the reason for that is if you started at Q2 of 2020, that was just after COVID started. So you had to use Q1. Otherwise, the numbers and the figures and the trends for the province would have been distorted. However, what we have done is where Q2 information of a particular sector or information was available, we added that information even though it's not for the period under review. For example, on page 130 of the PARO, you will see that we've added an Annexure A that deals with the labor data of Q2 of 2025, because the PARO tabling was in a different quarter than the period under review. And what we aim to do with the PARO is not only take short-term data, so your quarterly data is essentially a 3-month data, and that Q2 data could change in Q3. It could decline, it could increase, and again in Q4. But what the PARO aims to do is to look at that 5-year period to see whether you are making lasting and long-term impact in a particular area. But I'm going to ask that where specific questions on those sectors were asked, that the team just assist me there. On the finance sector that relates to page 11, so some of the drivers of the finance sector includes the sector's remarkable performance can be largely attributed to technological innovations like API platforms, robotic automation, telematics, and digital claim systems, which ignited a productivity revolution in South Africa's banking, insurance, and real estate sectors, slashing costs, accelerating processes, and redefining operational excellence. It also then in South Africa goes into the agriculture and construction sector and mining and manufacturing on pages 12 and 13. But I'll ask the team just to go through the respective sectors and the drivers for the increases or decreases in those sectors, please, just specifically. So, for example, you saw the decrease in the finance sector in Q2, but we've taken the long-term trend, and that might change in the next PARO, for example. So your Q2 data will be part of the next PARO, because then your Q1, Q2, Q3, and so on will be part of your next period under review. In terms of the multi-pronged approach and violence prevention, and now I'm going to refer to page 170 of the PARO, where we've attempted to include some of the impact of the safety plan. However, part of the reason we didn't add additional information is because that the department is currently reviewing the safety plan to what they term as Safety 2.0. So my hope is, and I completely agree with the member, my hope is that we're able to, going forward, include even more data on violence prevention and the impact of violence prevention. And I think a really cool example I'm not sure if cool is the correct word, maybe cool for me, is an example of how we did the G4J impact assessment and how we work with the Department of Economic Development and Tourism in this regard, where they were able to assist us with this respective figures and essentially where did you start? Where are you now? What is your target? Are you on track to getting to that particular target? And that, for example, an example of a summary of the G4J impact is on page 51, where you look at the different indicators: GDP growth, value of GDP, employment, unemployment rate, youth NEETs, youth unemployment, value of export, total cargo through ports, targeted sector GVA growth, business confidence index, your number of SMEs, your gross formation capital formation, your GDP per capita, your multi-factor productivity index, your research and development spend, your trust in your government, your blue dot ratings. So these are all examples of how one can measure plans. And again, Chairperson, it is not perfect in terms of how measurement works and how impact works. But what you start seeing in the PERO is our intent of trying to get to a space where we are tabling not only the data and the evidence, but are our plans also responding to the data and the evidence, and how is the data and the evidence and our plans linked? So you'll start seeing in this PERO much more movement towards that. On the learner and teacher ratio, and I'll ask the team just to come in here, on page, let me just get to the number quickly, 141, we deal with the learner teacher ratio, and on 139 we deal with the increase of learners in the school. So we will see, for example, that you have a population growth of 18%, but you also see that you have a learner growth of 16.6% in our schools, and we find that on page 139 it is actually 16.65% of additional learners that we receive. But I'll just ask the team to go more in detail of it. The 17 schools specifically were the ones linked to the rapid school build program. So it's not all of the schools that the department builds or does maintenance and repairs on and so on. It's the ones linked to rapid build, but I'll ask the team just to assist with extra information here. In terms of addressing learner and teacher ratio, these are all items that the departments will now take this information and be able to indicate what are their budget priorities going forward. Departments also need to come and indicate, for example, what are they going to prioritize, what are they going to deprioritize, what are those successes that one can scale, what is the impact of your policy decisions that you've made within your particular vote, and how do you want to move forward in this regard, and putting those business cases on the table. In terms of industrialization, I'll just also ask the team to come in here more. The households and increase in females, we see that on page 93. Let me just get to page 93 quickly. Yes, page 93. So majority of the house, so it's 40%, just under 40% currently. For 2024, it was 39.7% of all households, just under 40 for female headed. And you see over the years that it is increasing. You also see with child headed households that there are fluctuations throughout the year. And some of the drivers we will find on page 93. As well as 94 for those two details. And before I forget, because that was chapter 3, but in chapter 5, under social services, you will also find, now my memory must help me, yes, page 176, with the family dynamics, you also see an increase in single person households as well, and the impact of mental health. And then when it comes to female-headed households, some of the reasons they coincided with COVID pandemic, It also coincided with mortality rates disrupting household structures. It also coincided with and that led to a higher share of women taking household headship responsibilities. There's been labor migration. There's been separation and divorce, widowhood. There's been women increasing choice for independence. So there's been various different reasons for these items. But if we have more information on that, if the team can please assist me. On the where is the employment for women? The employment for women increased. And I'm gonna look for that number now because it was in the speech somewhere. But I'll if the team will get there before I do, then the team can deal with that one. Oh yes, wait, here we go. Youth employment grew by 13.3% in the Western Cape. So there's been an increase of youth in jobs in the Western Cape, and employment for women grew by 16.7% in the Western Cape. So that's an increase of jobs for women in the Western Cape that has increased. The team has more information on that. If you can please assist me. I dealt with Mero. There's also in terms of school buildings. For example, we mentioned the Rapid Build School program, and that funding we get through the budget facility for infrastructure, and we are also receiving additional money in the upcoming financial year relating to this. If the team can just assist me with the exact figures there, please. In terms of the rural districts and metros, I'll ask the team just to, because not every particular district was the same. In some districts, there's been an increase in the agriculture growth. In some, it was finance. In the metro, for example, we saw a mixed bag in terms of migration patterns and how it shows the possibility that people might be moving both for services and jobs. So those who move for services might not move for jobs. Those who move for jobs might not move for services. And some people might move for both. But I'll ask the team just to come in here. Then I'm not sure if Member Masipo answered his own question, if he wants us to go into the item. But wherever you see percentage growth, it is the change of growth from prior. So if you went from 30 to 35, then you had a 5 percentage point growth. But the difference between the 35 and the 30 will show you a different percentage growth. So it's just a bit of terminology. And then your percentage contribution is overall in your economic basket. What piece of the pie of your economy that makes part of. But I'll just ask Taryn and Philippus then, please, if you can explain it to us nicely in simple English, the difference between the percentage points, the percentage contribution, and the percentage growth, please. As well as assist with the metro and rural districts, HOD, and so on. Data provided, diversification, the AGOA and tariffs. Okay, this one. So we've added a member, I think it was Member Marais that asked me this question. So we've added some information, even though it was outside of the period of review. However, the 10%, you could start tracking the 10% impact because that was more or less just over 3 months ago. The 30% only came into effect in August. So we don't, I don't think we have enough data to assess the full impact of the 30% implication as yet. What we've tabled is the information that we have, and I'm hoping that as time goes by that we get additional information on the impact in our industry. And with us, you will see that we are quite concerned about manufacturing as well as the citrus industry, even in agriculture. But I'll ask the team if they can assist me here as well as with the breakdown with the permanent employment. In terms of aging population, distinguish between state dependent and non-state dependent, if this team can also assist there. I know we did publish in terms of the fact that we're becoming an aging population. And part of that implication is going to be is if you're becoming an aging population, first of all, that's going to affect our provincial equitable share formula. because there's a change in your ages in different subsectors of your pairs. The second part is it's going to also possibly increase the money you need to spend for specialized health services, for example, or specialized social sector services. So there is a possibility that that might increase. On the what are we doing into what can we do, manufacturing industry and so on. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to put some information in the payroll on energy, and we also, one new innovation that we did on page 61 deals with actually the progress of the Western Cape Resilience Program and how we're enabling the private sector in order to bring more non-Eskom generation on board. And you'll also see that we've split the paragraphs on generation as well as distribution in terms of electricity. So in terms of the non-Eskom generation, an extra 819 megawatts for the 2024-25 financial year was added, and it's anticipated another 1,000 will be added on in the 25-26 financial year. Then you will see that when it comes to international trade and ports, that we've added sections there, because we also see that when you have a working port, your GDP and your growth and your economy increases, and that's also in the Western Cape linked to agriculture as well. While it is not a separate chapter, almost in every single chapter, there's a blurb on digital infrastructure or the digital economy, or how digitization has affected our particular economy. And perhaps that is something that we need to look into. Perhaps we need to start tracking digital transformation and infrastructure much more specifically in terms of the payroll. Maybe that is homework for us to deal with. Tourism does have a particular section in the payroll, but the reason we highlighted it is because Stats SA's tourism doesn't necessarily speak to how we also measure tourism, because the way the sectors define themselves are a bit different. For example, even in transport, you will find there are things like AI and technology that falls within the transport sector and that's driving the transport sector growth. So it is a little bit difficult in that regard when you want to do a tourism section specifically. But our tourism items that we included starts at page 67, and we've included, for example, the international tourists to the Western Cape, as well as the domestic tourists. We've indicated there that international tourists to the Western Cape are spending an average of 17,000 Rand in 2024. We've included some more information on the Middle East, Europe, South America, North America, Australasia, Asia, and where we have information in that regard. We've gone further on page 68 in dealing with our top 10 tourist attractions and how they have performed. Dealing with our top attractions were the V&A Waterfront, Cape Town Central City, Camps Bay, Boulders Beach, National Park, Cape Point, Cape Winelands, Table Mountain, Cableway, Kirstenbosch, Botanical Gardens, Lions Head, and the Canal Walk Shopping Centre. And then there's also the UNESCO Heritage Sites, Pinnacle Point Site Complex, and the Cape West Coast Biosphere Reserve. Now, what we've done is we've taken the top items. There's obviously much more in our province, but we've shown the top 10 impact, as well as we've included on that page the arrivals of international tourists to Cape Town International Airport, and the overnight, how the overnight days and visitors worked. In terms of post-COVID-19, the UK retained its position as the leading international source market to the Western Cape in 2024. However, its share declined by 0.7 percentage points from 2019 to 16.4% in 2024. So there was a bit of a slower recovery in arrivals there. The United States was followed in second place, increasing its market share by 3.8 percentage points from 2019 to 15% in 2024. So there was a significant growth there of 45.4%. And Germany remained our third largest market, although their share also declined a bit by 0.6 percentage points to 14.5% in 2024. We also then on page 69 go onto the domestic front in terms of domestic tourism, destination arrivals, and overnight trips. And then on page 70 and 71, we go into a little bit more detail on overnight trips, on the economic value of ecotourism. There's a specific blurb for that, as well as page 71 dealing with the economic value of filmmaking in our province. And while the Pero was printed before I saw some of the news articles of the possibility of countries asking that filmmaking go back to Hollywood. It's those particular figures I won't have currently, but that is something that I myself am keeping an eye on, because we're hoping that it won't negatively affect our economy, given that we also have quite a robust film industry. I'm leaving all of the difficult technical items to yourself, HOD and the team. No, there were specific numbers and stats that we need to deal with. But if you can please assist me in that regard, I would much appreciate it.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, Chair. I'm going to touch just on 3 issues. First one is just providing perhaps a little bit more context in terms of the finance sector. And I think one needs to be mindful of the fact that what's happening in the finance sector is linked to what's happening in our monetary policy space. And so what we have seen and the expected growth in that sector is also linked to what one can expect perhaps with our repo rate over time. And what we can see is that in July, am I correct? The July number, the repo rate was has dropped to 7%. And in November, I think one is also expecting a similar type of touchwood outcome. And so it then explains a lot of the growth that we see in the finance sector, or it's a contributing factor to that. The second part that I wanted to just touch on is in terms of the manufacturing sector, and I think one cannot de-link it from how successful we are as a country with Operation Vulindlela, because there's a lot of dependencies in terms of what we want to if we want to see a revival of the manufacturing sector, then we need to look at our ports, our rail, our energy supply, because it is an extremely competitive, and we know that in Minister's speech, she mentioned the issue that our biggest competitor, I think, or even if we want to call it a competitor, because they are dominating that sector, and that's China. So it's going to be really difficult without unlocking some of the constraints in the economy if we're going to, it's going to be critical for us in order to improve our competitiveness and obviously profitability of the manufacturing sector. And then I just wanted to also touch on the issue around the learner teacher ratio, but I want to link it to what we see in the retention rate of what we see in the Western Cape compared to nationally. And what the Department of Education has been good at is really improving the retention rate at primary school level. We've seen an increase there from 80 to 92%, and then in secondary 69 to 71%. And then we've also achieved the highest retention rate nationally for grades 10 and to 12, which is at 71.3%. All of these things are contributing to the impact that will have in terms of the learner-teacher ratio. But there's also other factors that come into play, and obviously we would need to respond because of the fact that, and I think the member is quite correct, when we look at nationally what is happening, our teacher-learner ratio is is, if we look at that angle, it is perhaps not putting us in a favorable light comparatively. But if we look at the retention, then we are doing extremely well, and we also need to just keep that in mind. With that, through you, Chair, I'm going to just hand over to Taryn and the rest of the team, the chapter authors, to deal with the specifics. Thanks.
Thanks, Ajudi. So I think between yourself and Minister, you've broadly covered us, but Philip is just going to wrap up in terms of the detail with regards to the data and stats.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, with regards to the deindustrialization, the conclusion that we should get out of that piece of information is obviously the manufacturing sector is not performing as it should. It's not absorbing employment in the semi and unskilled labor force, and it means that South Africa is growing below potential. That is basically what we get out of that piece of information. With regards to the growth, I know that we shared jobs in the second quarter of 2025, but that is a quarterly piece of information. So we look at longer trends, which is more significant. And in the long run, the finance sector outperformed the other sectors in terms of employment creation. So on the multi-level approach to crime, the LEAP, how do we measure the impact of LEAP? Yeah, in this instance, we had the data of LEAP. We don't have the data whether the SAPS provide additional resources per quarter to those areas. If we have that data, we can incorporate it and then also account for that data. But at this stage, from the data that we have, LEAP definitely made an impact on crime in those areas. The Cape Metro, the reasons for the lower growth in the Cape Metro, what we know is that the crime is higher in the Cape Metro than the rural district. So that's one factor that we can put data behind and say, okay, higher crime. The other factors that we now can only speculate, we don't have data to support, is traffic congestion, which affect productivity, living costs, which is most likely higher in the Cape Metro than the rural district. The emerging trend of working from home, that must have had an impact on the growth in the rural districts. And then there was also a question linked to this one, why the high unemployment rate in the Cape Metro as opposed to the rural districts. For one, the GDP growth, lower GDP growth, high unemployment rate, that makes sense. But also there's most likely, and here we speculate again, a perceived better social services, hospitals and schools in the Cape Metro than rural districts. So that would mean that poorer people will flow to the Cape Metro to have access to these facilities. In terms of the link between the G4J and learner-teacher ratio, so the learner-teacher ratio is quite high because of fiscal pressures. We need additional tax money to appoint teachers to lower this learner-teacher ratio. In order to get additional tax money, we need growth. And that is what the G4J is there to create growth. So that is the link. If G4J is successful, hopefully we can appoint more teachers and lower that learner-teacher ratio. Then on the district trends, yeah, we didn't calculate the growth per municipality, only per district area. There was also a remark made that why does the municipalities not benefit from the growth? But they most probably do benefit from the growth. But with growth, there's always inequalities. Some people benefit, some not. And I think that's the key challenge. On the overcrowding of schools, why 17 additional schools not enough? It should also be remembered that 17 additional schools, that's the net in addition, was built in over a period of 2 years where the learner numbers were calculated over a decade. So at this stage, we're trying to fix something in 2 years that basically started by more than a decade ago. So give it time. If we continue on that path, we might have an impact on the overcrowding of schools. Yeah, there's something else. Then the difference between the finance. So the one period, the finance sector, one was the growth contribution. That was measured the difference over a 20-year period, and the other was, that was contribution, and the other one was growth contribution over a 10-year period. So the difference between a growth contribution is we calculate the growth, say the growth is 7%, and how do we express that the sector's contribution to that 7% growth? Then we talk about percentage points. So, for example, I think it was 5.9 percentage points. So that is a growth is a flow, but when we talk about the sector's contribution, we talk about more a stock type of statistic, and that is just a piece of the cake, as the minister said. So yeah, it's two different concepts and it's two different periods. Yeah, on the data diversification, the need for the agriculture to diversify in order for this to compensate for the US tariffs. I'm sure that they will diversify, but the private sector is resilient and they normally will adapt. So yeah, I think the export companies will also have will look for alternative markets in that instance. In terms of the definition of employment, term of employment, short term, long term. Now we get formal employment and we get informal employment. The calculation that was done for the districts is a combination between formal employment as provided by SARS, that is actual employment numbers. Then added to that is informal employment measured by the QLFS. The informal employment is not that secure. So those people typically don't have a written contract or medical aid. So typically they would be on a shorter term employment. So we can use those terms as a proxy for long-term and short-term employment. Then the aging population, we currently don't have data for private versus state pensioners. We would like to get the data. If we can get it, we would like to add it to next year's payroll. And what can be done in the Western Cape to create jobs. We've got lots of examples in the book also of policies that work for some countries. The one was for Albania and the other one was for Argentina. And I think what stood out there was large infrastructure projects. So given that the construction sector declined the past decade, I think the Western Cape, if we can speed up our infrastructure projects, it can create jobs and also increase productivity. In terms of how can the tourism sector compensate for the manufacturing sector? So look, the tourism sector is normally estimated. There's no tourism sector from Stats SA. We have to estimate, so we'll get different estimations. From what I've seen, what DDAT did in the past, the tourism sector is not that large. The manufacturing sector in South Africa is about 13%, whereas the tourism sector is about 3%. So I don't think tourism can compensate for contracting manufacturing sector in that sense. Not if you look in just in pure quantity. So yeah, I think that's about it from my side. Thank you. Sorry, just one more thing. The contributions per district is set out in page 54. That explains why some districts outperform the Cape Metro and why they outperform other districts. So we've got two tables here. The second table shows contribution to GDP growth. And then we can clearly see that the West Coast and the Central Karoo is heavily dependent on agriculture. And also the manufacturing sector is also making a significant contribution to the West Coast again and the Oeverberg. So that's really interesting table, and that will provide us with more insight into why certain districts grow faster. Thank you.
Apologies, I just wanted to check if we dealt with the three definitions of growth, contribution, and percentage points. I can just deal with it quickly. Okay, so for example, if you go from 30% to 35%, then your 35% is your contribution of the pie. But the growth would be either 5 percentage points growth, or it would be you take that 5% and then you'd find that the 30 to 35 gives you 16.67% growth. So it's just the different definitions for those items. Thank you.
Minister HOD and team, thanks for those responses. I know I see Member Beatrice's hand, and then I see Member Masipa's hand. I'm just going to see if there are further questions here. Then I think Member Nkondlo. So I think let's go to Member Beatrice at this stage for a second round.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to crime, Chairperson, because we have debates about it nearly every week. And there's a call for the devolution of police powers. But it seems that we don't have a plan to fight violent crime. What special intervention are you proposing to fight crime in the Western Cape, especially violent crime?
Thank you, Member Beatrice. I think, some of that is probably should be directed more to that relevant standing committee than this standing committee, because I think that what we are dealing with here is really the recordal of the data and the information over this recent period. Member Masipa.
Thank you, Chairperson, and really thank you to the Minister and the team for reply to my questions earlier. This is probably new questions. The first one is on slide number 8 that relates to rise in female-headed households. I know that you have provided us with the insights in terms of what are the causes. But I just thought that maybe we can go a little bit deeper with regards to this reasons, like high mortality rates in men, And I think the question will be what caused that mortality rates in men, if the insights, is able to really educate us if there are things that we men need to look at, especially with regards to our health, so that we can really live a little bit longer. We can reduce this amount of female-headed households. If there is some insights there, I'll really appreciate, Chair, that the team share in that regard. The next one, I just can't remember what slide number is, but it talks to the recession, Swartland and the Karoo as a result of floods. The recession obviously will mean that there's been a negative growth for 2 or 3 consecutive quarters, which I can't remember. But I just want to hear what has been the numbers in terms of that contributed to that recession, in terms of the consecutive losses, and where are we now in those 2 particular areas in terms of growth as such. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. That's all from my side. I'm just trying to look at the slide number, but I think they will be able to locate the slides. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Over to Member Nkondlo, and then it looks as if Member Beatrice, have you got an additional question there? But we'll take Member Nkondlo in the meantime.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the responses. Chair, I would encourage, if there's nothing that prohibits the colleagues in Treasury, as they put data together, to indeed go and find the data, that looks at the contribution of SEPs and other interventions that are contributing to the reduction of crime in those hotspot areas, including LIP. Because, if we don't do that, as Minister was saying, The purpose of this is to use this data to justify budget allocation and other related resources. So we should not in any way present through our data and its limitations skewed conclusions,
Burton,
because if we
do me a
don't,
favor, man.
we
Don't you
are
just want
gonna
to
get
send
to
me the water bill?
Member Masiba, can you please mute? We are gonna get ourselves to believe if we were to dispense LEAP officers, more LEAP officers, that would mean a reduction of crime and prevention of violence, which I'm sure LEAP officers are contributing, that there is no argument about that. But I think it's important for us to do this work because we must account for resources of the public that are provided into this type of intervention. So I would want to encourage the colleagues, if there's nothing prohibiting them to use SEPS data, in also nuancing what is the performance of those hotspots. Secondly, I would want to say, when it comes to the trend line versus the quarterly performance, I am definite that these are related. So I'm concerned, and I would be interested also in looking at what would have caused the 40,000 decline, or plus 40,000 decline of jobs in the Western Cape from the finance sector, which also is coupled with also a almost similar number of decline of jobs in the very construction. Because whilst the trend line is giving us these positive numbers over time, it would be our interest to maintain that, and also be concerned if in the latest or the recent quarterly performance, there is something that is driving a sort of a decrease of that particular performance. So I am sure, reading the quarterly performance against the trend line, it can never be viewed as a isolated a sort of a number analysis, instead of looking at them as actually two sides of the same coin, because that particular trend is actually a totality of these quarterly records that we look at. The last one that I wanted to understand, Chair, at this point, is to understand. At one point I had, I think the presenter is such that I'm struggling in my in finding that a slide that was presented that actually mentioned, the numbers of jobs that have been recorded, especially for those that have got secondary education, which I think the presentation also makes mention of those in terms of the numbers over time that we've seen. I think they say it's actually a surge, if I'm not mistaken, of about a remarkable 80% of additional labor force from previously disadvantaged groups with a secondary education were absorbed. I think it's from the minister's speech. Now, from that, I think the colleague, as he was presenting, mentioned also that a 64% thereof is from the previously advantaged, if I've heard it well. And if not, they could correct me. I'm just trying to understand, because I think he gave a percentage of those that are secondary educated, and also he made mention of this 64. I think he was just too fast for me to pick up the percentage of the secondary educated versus the previously advantaged that he referred to as 64%, if I heard correctly. If you can just repeat that and just give context so that one can better understand what the meaning. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo. I'm just looking if there are any further hands on further questions that members would like to have answered. I see Member Beatrice.
Chairperson, let's keep the peace. I'm representing a constituency, very big constituency, third largest party in the Western Cape, Patriotic Alliance. If I ask a question, there's a reason for it. And that question is out of the minister.
Yeah, Minister indicates she will deal with the question. I think what is important here is also the amount of data that or additional data that Provincial Treasury is starting to gather here. And, I'm sure Minister and HOD will probably also just comment on the fact that there are trends that would then emerge in certain areas which may require more funding possibly than other areas, because I think it's always a finite cake and slices of cake that they need to be shared between the various departments. But I think that looking through, I think that's the questions that we have at this stage, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I will try my best to deal with as many as possible. Where we don't have information, we will either see whether information is available or if that is something we need to try and see if we can incorporate into a future PERO. So there is some information that we've included on page 170 on the impact of the safety plan. But before I get to those, so you have your safety plan. You have the department busy working on updating the safety plan, and they're referring to it as 2.0. But you also have your policing needs and priorities that gets tabled to the Community Safety Committee as well, in terms of what the needs of a province is and how we submit that information to the police. And there's a lot of information that I know is already publicly available in that PMP. For example, something that's in there that's not necessarily in this document currently is, for example, how many detectives we have in the province, is what is the current police ratio per police station in our province, for example, and what does that look like? Are we under-resourced? Are we under-equipped? Are we under-trained? And what that looks like. So a lot of that additional information is in the PMP. And if the member has read the PMP, it would know that it's a much larger document even than the documents before us today. So in some respects, there are wonderful data available from departments, and data, for example, in terms of the PMP, in terms of what the state of policing policing needs and priorities look like, is also in that. So on page 170, we, for example, included a few items dealing with significant progress in strengthening safety infrastructure and social support services, with its core goal of reducing murders by 50%. That is obviously that's the target. Policing interventions such as the deployment of LEAP, we refer to section 5.5.2 there, the accreditation of 1,137 neighborhood watch structures, the confiscation of 812 firearms have enhanced enforcement capacity, while the Western Cape Liquor Authority enforcement operations expanded more than tenfold from 80 to 1,047 operations. On the social side, the province exceeded targets in parenting support and substance abuse treatment and psychosocial support for GBV victims, with the latter rising dramatically from 580 in 2018, 2019 to 24,464 in 2024-25. The introduction of new preventative measures such as identifying and supporting over 4,200 children at risk, reflecting progress in tackling the root causes of violence. Overall, while enforcement gains have not translated into lower violent crime, strong performance in social interventions highlight the need for more integrated prevention-focused approach to improving safety outcomes. And I'll quickly also just deal with LEAP and safety. What we did is we specifically showed what is happening in the Western Cape overall and what happens at the hotspots where we deployed LEAP. So when you look at the Western Cape overall, you will see a bit of a mixed bags of increases and decreases in terms of different categories, whereas you will see murder is still on the rise in the Western Cape, and we must acknowledge that, because this is people's real lived realities that murder is increasing. However, when you look at the hotspot specifically where LEAP is deployed, and this we see on pages 168 and 169. And what we did is we put the different stations in different color blocks as well. Delft, Mfuleni, Harare, Kraaifontein, Khayelitsha, Atlantis, Mitchells Plain, Samora, Machel, and Yanga, and Philippi, Bishop Lavis, Guguletu, Philippi East. We've put that information there. And then on the one side, we specifically showed what the difference is in murder, sexual offences, robbery at residential premises, drug-related crime, driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And as much as I would love to be able to get my hands on extra data on violence prevention and be able to publish that in Pero, we also have to acknowledge that there has been notable improvement and notable progress in the areas where there has been LEAP deployment. Because in every single category, there has been a decrease in those particular crimes on average when you compare to the rest of the Western Cape. So we do acknowledge that improvement. We acknowledge the progress, but it does not mean we must stop there. We must continue making sure that we make inroads when it comes to crime, to make our province safer, and to make sure that we're able to bring that statistics to the committee in terms of violence prevention. And I see it as an opportunity, Chairperson, for us to go and delve even deeper into how do we measure violence prevention programs. I just quickly pulled out my overview of the provincial revenue and expenditure for the 2025 year. While I don't have all the details of every single program relating to safety, what you have on page 92 of the MTEF budget policy priorities for the year, you have a bit of a summary in terms of some of the safety programs, including provincial traffic law enforcement adds to it, improving LEAP effectiveness, strengthening community-based safety, anti-gang and police oversight, integrated transport hub, Chrysalis Academy, after-school programs, substance abuse disorder services, safe school program, violence prevention unit, area-based teams, child protection, child and youth care centers, victim empowerment program, victim and perpetrator recovery programs, neighborhood watches, community policing forums. So while not every single item dealing with violence prevention might sit with POCs, we do work on violence prevention as a government transversely across departments, and really I'm hoping that going forward we will be able to pull and publish that data as well. In terms of what is happening to men's health, I don't have all the answers for member Masipa. However, we have a general top 10 leading natural causes of death in the Western Cape on page 151. The latest data is 2022, because this was the last update by Statistics SA. And the leading causes, and I'll start at the leading one, is diabetes mellitus. So essentially diabetes, cerebrovascular diseases, HIV disease, hypertensive diseases, and then it goes on in terms of, goes down the line. However, Member Masipa, this is not broken down men versus women. This one is a general one for the whole province. But I'm sure that our colleagues in health and wellness through the committee might even be able to assist us in unpacking some of this information. But also, I just want to make a note, it's not the increase in female households is not just the mortality of men. It also includes independence of females as well. So maybe there we must ask the women their feelings about men and their own independence. I will not speak for all women in this regard, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. I don't actually think we have do we have the breakdown? Okay, I'll hand over. Thank you. Yeah, guys, the team is up now. Okay, then the team, if you can please assist me with the recession in the different areas. Go find. Yes, we spoke about crime and safety. Okay, Q2 performance. So yes, the Q2 performance, what we've done is we've added that on page 130 because, Chair, we didn't want to create a skewed portrayal of the province. So we added that extra after the period of review because We did go up in terms of unemployment a little bit. However, even if you look at Q1 2020 and the Q2 of 2025, then overall jobs have still increased, overall unemployment have still come down. And we must just be careful not to look at the quarters in isolation as well, that we look at the long-term trends and whether you are making that long-term impact. And that is the aim of us doing this. And part of the reason, under normal circumstances, we probably would have used Q2 of 2020 until maybe Q2 2025. But the COVID-19 lockdown would have skewed our statistics. So it would have also been irresponsible if we changed the period of review because of that. So the most responsible way to then publish the data is Q1 of 2020, Q1 of 2025. And then in order to keep the integrity of the data, we've added those annexures where the period under the review and the publication of the document was different. Secondary education, that's page 126. And I'll just quickly repeat that. So previously disadvantaged groups, that includes the African cohort as well as the colored cohort in terms of previously disadvantaged group. I just need to check with the team if it also includes the Indian cohort. But the team can assist. It's just the colored and African cohort. Okay. So the portion that was 80% was the 80% of the additional labor force in the previously disadvantaged group, so you can interpret that as African and colored, was absorbed into employment over the period. So people attaining those jobs in those particular sectors, and 64.3% of all new jobs created in the period under review were attained by this group. So essentially 64.3% of the net jobs essentially for the period under review for the PERO was a combination of the African and colored cohorts of increase in net jobs then. And then HOD and team, I will hand over to you and all the detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. So I'm going to revert back to the chapter authors, because I think when we do put a chapter together, there's a lot of other data that perhaps won't find its way into the actual publication, but we do have a reference list at the end of each of these chapters. So we're going to start with Jonathan, then Chad, and then Philip. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, actually. Member Masipak, if I can direct you to page 87 of the PERO, specifically above the paragraph, just above figure 3.8. And this paragraph partly explains that the factors impacting the high mortality rates among men. So in the province, high mortality rates among men is driven by a combination of factors. This includes a greater burden of non-communicable diseases, as mentioned by our minister, such as cardiovascular illness, higher exposure to occupational hazards in sectors such as mining and construction, and then also risky health behaviors such as smoking and excessive alcohol consumption. So men are also more vulnerable to violence and injury, while generally making less use of preventative health care services compared to women. These combined factors explain why male life expectancy in the province remains consistently lower than that of females, and this equates to a gap of around 5 years between males and females. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question, Member Mkondlo. I think to just build on what our Minister said around us really looking at the long terms, but why that particular quarter shift between Q1 and Q2 2025, if you look at the third quarter 2024 to the second quarter 2025, you'll see that the trend of jobs being added in the financial sector accelerates. And usually what happens when we kind of see this acceleration is we also then see a correction or a slowdown after that kind of acceleration in the job market. And so that's most likely the explanation for why you see such a large number coming off in Q2 in terms of the decrease there. But we would need more time, given that it's a recent development, to kind of really explain the other determinants. But I think that longer term trend and how that changes and why that might now be coming down is the deceleration after periods of acceleration. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, with regards to the question on the floods linked to the recession, so that recession would only be in the agricultural sector, and we can see some of that evidence also on page 54. In 2024, there was a massive recession in agriculture in the West Coast, in Cape Winelands of 11.5% and 10.9% in Overberg. So it's not only a few quarters for the entire year. And I'm sure if we take last year's Pero, there will also be negative values for agriculture in the same table. So therefore, the link between the floods and the recession that was made. For the Swartland municipality in particular, we don't really cover municipalities, we only cover districts. So we don't have data for Swartland in particular. But it will be covered in the Mero later on. In terms of the SAPs and interventions and the impact on hotspot areas, so normally when we try to calculate the impact of a project, we normally have a control group, and the control group was periods where LEAP was not implemented. Now we have to make the assumption that the other intervention was SAPS. We have to make the assumption that their intervention remains constant over time, and that they didn't also per coincidence target the same areas at the same quarters, adding additional resources than the LEAP project. That would be sort of highly unlikely, but if it's the case and if we've got data to support that, we're willing to also acknowledge SAP's contribution. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that. I do not see any questions, so I believe we've exhausted those. We can possibly try the video now, and then I'm proposing that we possibly have a short break. I see Member Nkondo possibly. Do you have a further question?
Chair, I just wanted to check with the minister and the department going towards the Mero. Is it possible to get the booklet at least a week earlier before the presentation? You know how this helps? It helps us as members to be equally empowered like the colleagues who are drafters of this document, because it's always a challenge, and we appreciate the presentations that they make to come and explain what they have written. But considering that they sit with this information longer than us, so the gaps in information and in understanding is always going to be a hindrance in us appreciating what is in the information. So I'm asking, is it possible, starting with the Mero, but also keeping this, going into the future, where booklets like a Pero, we get them at least a week before, so that we are able to read and understand, and when we come here, we can have a better appreciation of what the colleagues have been working on for months. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Member Nkondo. Yes, I think we'll discuss that with the department as such, but I think there's nothing preventing you coming with a question later on, and then we can submit that to the department. Yes, at a later committee meeting, we could also deal with further questions there. But I agree with you. It is a lot of data that's within the documentation before us today that we haven't even had a chance to look at. But I think we'll note that for following up and seeing how we can do that on a structured basis, so that all members are then aware of that type of question and the responses to it. So I think we can probably try the video now, and then I'm suggesting that we perhaps just have a short 5-minute comfort break quickly before we go on to the next part of the presentations.
Residents of the Western Cape, ever wondered how we're really doing as a province? The 2025 Provincial Economic Review and Outlook tells that story. It's more than stats. It's the lived reality of our people, shaped economic constraints and provincial resilience. Let's start with the big picture. Over the past decade, South Africa's economy expanded on average by a mere 0.7% per annum. Not nearly enough to shift the needle for ordinary South Africans. Over the same period, the national construction sector declined by nearly a third, while the finance sector made a substantial contribution to overall growth of the national economy. Bold policy reforms are therefore required to boost our construction, mining and manufacturing sectors in order to unlock the full potential of the South African economy. Despite national headwinds, the Western Cape is holding strong. We contributed 14.2% in 2024 to national GDP, with projected growth of 0.8% this year and 1.3% next year. We're building towards a 1 trillion rand economy and 600,000 new jobs by 2035. Ambitious? Yes. Achievable? Absolutely. Over the past decade, the performance of rural districts played a pivotal role in the overall health of the provincial economy. On average, the rural districts recorded almost double the GDP growth rate of the Cape Metro, which resulted in lower unemployment rates. Over the same period, exports in mining and agriculture products surged, while tourism bounced back from COVID lockdowns with more than 930,000 international visitors landing in Cape Town in 2024. Energy security is key, and the Western Cape government recognizes that providing a stable supply of electricity to homes and businesses drives growth. That's why our energy resilience program added 819 megawatts last year, with 1,000 megawatts more on the way. What about jobs? Between the first quarters of 2020 and 2025, the Western Cape created 89% of all net jobs in South Africa. Indeed, a hefty contribution. Furthermore, in the second quarter of 2025, the Western Cape had the lowest narrow unemployment rate in the country at 21.2%, with significantly lower unemployment rates among the youth, females, and Africans compared to South Africa. Fueled by net immigration, our population grew significantly by 18.0% in the past decade, leading to increased service delivery pressures in frontline services. However, the Western Cape government responded to the challenge, launching innovative solutions like the Rapid School Build program, an alternative service delivery model in public health care, leading to 17 additional schools in only 2 years, while innovation in home-based health services and improved access to public health services recorded a decline of 15.5% in facility-based healthcare in the past decade. Although housing demand rose to an all-time high, we will continue to add to the more than 145,000 housing opportunities already delivered over the past decade. Even though infrastructure needs are growing, the residents of the Western Cape saw notable improvements over the past 20 years in the share of residents with access to basic municipal services such as refuse removal, flush toilets, and pipe water, all above national figures. Safety matters. The overall growth in the number of murders in the past 5 years remains a challenge. Although the reduction in residential burglaries, drug-related incidents, and driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs are welcomed. We applaud the efforts of governments, NPOs, and partners in the fight against crime. But to turn the tide, we demand our province's fair share of national policing resources. Until then, we'll battle relentlessly. The Western Cape has deployed on average more than 700 LEAP officers in crime hotspot areas, and we are seeing encouraging results. The average share of crime in hotspot areas compared to the rest of the Western Cape declined notably after the deployment of LEAP officers. Murder is down by 3.8 percentage points, residential robberies down by 3.5 percentage points, and sexual offenses down by 1.6 percentage points. However, managing crime is more complex than simply adding to policing. We are also stepping up our diversion program as a means to rehabilitate criminals and spare them from the enduring scars of formal prosecution. In this regard, we've increased the number of diversion programs over the past 4 financial years by a significant 164.4% for adults and 32.9% for kids. The Provincial Economic Review and Outlook isn't just a report. It's a reflection of our journey and the challenges we face, the progress we make, and the people who drive it all. To dive deeper, visit westerncape.gov.za/provincial-treasury.
Thank you very much for that. I think that is a good summary and description of the work that has been done here. I think the documentation before us and the speech today has certainly set out very clearly what we are trying to do, and I think the addition of additional data is taking us further into the future and a better understanding of what we're doing. So what I'm proposing, if we need a 5-minute break now, that we take that and then we'll dive into the next briefing. So I think we just need to be back here by about 1:45. Yes, by about 1:45. Thank you.
Memory. Thank you very much. I've a wonderful power pack. This, I mean, it really charges things. It sort of holds its charge. I mean, you can charge your phone a couple of times over a couple of days, but then it doesn't help if the cable doesn't work. Yeah, but some of them are broken. I've had it for a while. Is there anything else in terms of the presentation?
Member Walters, we are Ngola. Yo.
Sorry, say again. Let me just check with her.
Member Walters, Member Walters.
Are you? Yeah, they back to my
I think let us see if we can get started or resume our meeting. Thank you, members and Minister and Department. I think we can move to the next part of our session today, which relates to the briefing on Q1 performance and financial outcomes, being part of the 25-26 financial year. I think if I can hand over to you, Minister, and then to the team.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. So, Chair, this presentation, as usual, is based on the more comprehensive report that we table every quarter for the Budget Committee. This will deal with Q1 of the 25-26 financial year, which is essentially April, May, June. I just also want to just caution us because we also had a delayed national budget adoption. So you will also see that in terms of our performance, it is also some of it is also linked to that delay as we were spending according to the 2024 budget at the time. For the period under review. But I'm going to hand over to our HOD and our team just to take us through the key matters. Yes, as well as Department of the Premier. I think Doc is online. Thanks.
I think that Jacques, you're going to take the lead, and then we'll follow with the financial information with the analysts. Thanks.
Thank you, HT. Just on Dr. Ismail is on leave. I'll be standing in. So representing the Department of the Premier, Faisal, Noordin, and myself will represent and present the non-financial performance data outcomes for Q1, and that's across the provinces. Okay, on the overview of provincial performance for Q1, 319 targets, or 77% from a total of 414 targets across our 13 departments and 11 public entities were achieved. On the overview of institutional performance, departments achieved 76% of their 339 targets, and public entities achieved 84% of their 75 targets. None of the departments achieved 100% in the first quarter on their targets, and 3 public entities achieved 100%. 4 departments partially achieved their 18% of their quarterly targets, and public entities 8%. It's also clear that the government cluster achieved the highest performance for the departments at 84% and public entities, the economic cluster at 88%. Again, details of the data that we share here is on high level and can be found in the provincial quarterly release that was issued to all members. Next slide. This slide shows the quarterly performance across departments against a provincial average of 76%. 7 departments achieved more than or equal to the Western Cape government average. The following 6 departments achieved less than the average. It's Education, Health Department, Social Development, Department of Infrastructure, Western Cape Mobility Department, and the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. The key reasons for the impact on performance were reported as delays with validations, as well as some resource constraints, specifically on demand-driven indicators that had a big impact, and dependency on stakeholders, as well as capacity constraints. Next slide. For public entities, 6 public entities achieved more than or equal to the Western Cape government average of 84%. The following 3 public entities achieved less than the average, which is the Western Cape Liquor Authority, Freeport Saldanha, as well as Atlantis SEZ. The Western Cape Culture Commission did not have any planned targets for Q1 to report on. And then lastly, the key reasons for impact on the public entity side also allude to demand-driven indicators, delay in internal processes, some resource constraints, and dependency on stakeholders. I'm handing over to Faisal Nuruddin.
Thank you. So just some specifics then flowing from that. Firstly, in growing the economy and supporting job creation, the GDP for the Western Cape increased by 0.5% in the first quarter, whilst unemployment remained at 90.6%. Again, the Q2 updates is that the unemployment went up to 21.2%. Some of the key delivery from departments in supporting this, but a lot more are available in the report. In terms of police oversight and community safety, 212 youth were trained through the Chrysalis Academy. Social development created 703 EPWP work opportunities, as well as 3,627 youth participated in skills development programs. Department of Infrastructure, 467 work opportunities created through road infrastructure projects. In environmental affairs and development planning, 99% of EIA applications were finalized within the legislated timeframes. In agriculture, 281 green jobs were created for EPWP workers. There was rehabilitation of 9,544 hectares of agricultural land, which provided work, and 688 participants were trained in skills development. In DDAT, 68 businesses were supported through economic interventions, and 293 individuals were registered as tourist guides. Next slide. In terms of safety, homicide statistics for the Western Cape showed that there was a 2% decrease year on year from Q1 2024-25. There was also 2,439 sexual assault presentations at our public hospitals. Again, in terms of delivery, police oversight and community safety, 59 neighborhood watch structures were approved for accreditation, 8 police stations were assessed. Social development, 629 children were placed in foster care, 511 victims of crime and violence were provided access to services and safe environments, and 293 children in conflict with the law were referred to diversion programs. In the Department of Infrastructure, 6,240 kilometers of gravel roads were bladed to non-safety and serviceability. 973 speed operations and 1,464 traffic law enforcement operations were conducted by the Department of Mobility. 531,547 vehicles were also stopped and inspected, and a further 1,028 drunken driving operations were conducted. The Western Cape Liquor Authority, 100% of liquor licensing tribunal fines were issued. Going on to Educated Health and Caring Society, the HIV positive rate for 15 to 24-year-olds for the first quarter, was 1.3%. Also for the period under review, 14.91% of children born in government facilities weighed under 2,500 grams. In education, 743 ECD facilities were fully registered as compliant, 308 therapists and specialist staff in public special schools. In health and wellness, 74.3% of TB clients completed DSTB treatments. 69% of children under 1 year completed their primary course of immunization. In social development, 4,656 older persons benefited from subsidized beds. 8,271 older persons benefited from subsidies that were transferred to community-based care and support services. 5,501 victims of gender-based violence accessed psychosocial support services. 111 persons with disabilities live in government-owned residential facilities, and 22,117 vulnerable persons were provided with subsidized meals. In agriculture, 107 households were supported with agricultural food production initiatives. 57 veterinary public health samples were analyzed for food safety, and 154 inspections were carried out at meat-producing outlets. Thank you.
When we look at the financial outcome for the first quarter, as of 30th of June, the context of the first quarter in a usual quarter is that the departments are applying for the underspending of the previous financial year, and they're applying for that in terms of within the first quarter of this new financial year. So that's the usual business within the first quarter, besides service delivery continuing. This year, as Minister has indicated, we have been impacted by the national government in terms of the budget process that was longer than it was intended, and that has slightly had an impact in terms of service delivery from the percentage in terms of what we spent if we compare it to last year. So when we look at the main budget to be tabled, the 88 billion rand, the adjustment that you see there is taking into account, and it's for reporting purposes only. So what I mean by that is that we have not passed a new adjustments budget. It is taking for reporting purposes, taking in the rollover approval by the national government specifically for infrastructure and agriculture. If the committee remembers, last year in the adjustments budget, we received about 945 million rand for flood damage. And then that was rolled over in the middle of the month of June for approval for departments to continue spending. So that's the 828 million you see in the adjustment column, and the 150,000 rollover, that's for social development that was approved by the national government. That is for the expanded public works conditional grant. Then in terms of spending, we spent of the 88 billion rand, we spent 20.2 billion rand, which amounts to about 22.7 billion rand. That is just a bit under from, under in terms of compared to last year. We spent about 23.5% last year. And there you can see now the impact of spending on 25's appropriation bill, which we were forced to do in terms of the prolonged budget process that happened. So when we look at the average spend is 22.7 for us as a province, and you look at the departments have spent below that. So that if you look at it's the provincial treasury, it's the local government department, police and oversight, and community safety, also cultural affairs and sport, and then you'll also see the mobility department that is spent below the 20% at least. Those are departments that are transfer payments driven. And so firstly, in the first quarter of the financial year, especially transfer payments to municipalities. So we do know that from the 1st of April to June is still the fourth quarter of the 24-25 budget for municipalities. And so we find in the first quarter that the provincial departments do not start transferring funding of their 25 budget in that quarter. And that's the reason for for the lower spending for those provinces, for those departments, and some of those departments expenditure on provincial transfers to municipalities are almost 50%, ranges from 50% of their budget to 1/4 of their budget. As at the 30th of September, again, the projected over expenditure for year end is mainly in terms of inherent pressure. For example, in the Department of Health, in terms of the goods and services budget, in terms of that is the budget is below inflationary amounts that is required, and then also the impact, like I said, of rollover and revenue retention applications that on the provincial side has not yet been approved. So when we look at the detail of that projected overspending of 353 million on the next page, the Health and Wellness Department, they have spent 7.3 billion of their budget, but project a 343 net overspending of their budget, and that's mainly, like I said, the inherent pressure of goods and services at this stage, 30th of June. At the time of reporting, it was sitting at 580 million rand as a pressure for the year. At that stage also, as the trend for the 24-25 financial year, the COE had an underspending because of the high attrition rate in 24-25. And so the underspending on COE projected for the year is about 310. And therefore the net amount that you see there for health and wellness in terms of 343 million. On the local government, it's a 6.2 billion rand projected overspend, and that is mainly due to a rollover application where the department has applied in order to roll over for IT refresh equipment. So this is equipment that they have ordered in the previous financial year, but either was not delivered and therefore they could not make the payment, and therefore they are asking in terms of to roll over that amount from one financial year to the other. So if this is approved in the adjustments budget, then that risk of overspending would then fall away. Similarly, in the Police and Oversight and Community Safety Department, there is a 2.1 million rand projected overspending, and this is in terms of expenditure for security cameras, which is also for a rollover application, and would be considered as part of the adjustments budget process. Like I said before, if it is approved, the rollover, then that risk then will fall away for all the departments, except in terms of the risk, which health has managed over time. For every year, they've been balancing this overspend on, pressure on GNS, goods and services, versus all the other spending items by the end of the year. When we move along to public entities, in terms of public entities, we spend 20% of our just over 1 billion rand budget. And at this stage, no risk is indicated by either of the public entities. The 67,000 rand that you see as projected in terms of an under expenditure is really in terms of accrual accounting, and that is in terms of accrual for leave provision that will be taken up and will be dealt with in the second quarter, and therefore in terms of the underspending, they will not necessarily underspend when we come and report in terms of the second quarter of the financial year. Moving on then to infrastructure. And from an infrastructure perspective, we have a budget of just about 11.3 billion rand, of which we spent about 2.5 billion rand, and that's about 22.9% of the budget. To note that infrastructure spend has improved when we look at it in terms of the previous quarter. Previous financial year for the same quarter, for the same period. Last year, this time, we spent about 17.3% of our budget. This year, we spent 22.9%. The main increase in terms of spending is really in terms of human settlements, where human settlements have actually doubled their spending when we compare quarter one of 24-25 and quarter one of 25-26. And so they have increased and like I said, doubled their spending, and that's the main reason for the increase that we see here. As I indicated on the rollover application that was approved by National Treasury around the flood damage, There we have spent to date about 236 million rand on the flood damage amount, and mostly that was for ecological infrastructure. It was spent about on 23 schools, 15 healthcare facilities that was impacted by the flood damage, and then numerous roads. We are expecting the roads, especially the roads spending to increase as the warmer weather in terms of increases during the year. Then on the next slide is looking at infrastructure category. And here the trend is that spending is in line with how we have budgeted, meaning that departments are spending and as they have budget in terms of mainly in terms of maintenance, and then also in terms of the repairs is in terms of 27% of total infrastructure budget. So there we are aligned in terms of what the budget plans were in terms of when we tabled. Moving along then to and wrapping up on the provincial own revenue. For provincial own revenue, in terms of departmental own revenue that has been collected, we've collected about 33.8% of the 683 million rand budget, and that's mainly collected by health and wellness. And then also for the infrastructure department that has collected almost half already of their own revenue budget. The main reason for the collection on infrastructure is mainly due to the collection is due to sales in terms of first home finance units and rental income, as well as in terms of the income from the building of leased buildings. And then when we look now at the second half of that table, and we'll just focus on the taxes in terms of gambling taxes and liquor license taxes, there we have collected in total a combination of 23% of the 3.7 billion rand target that we set for ourselves. When we look at in terms of individually, the gambling taxes is collected in terms of 30.4% of its budget, while the motor vehicle license is sitting at just under 20% of the budget. At this stage, we are looking closely and making sure that we are collecting on target, because as we do now in this province, we have the targets we set ourselves to collect, we have budgeted for. So it's quite important for us to keep our eye on this every quarter. From that perspective, Chair, that's the first quarter presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. Certainly we understand the shivering that we went through in the first quarter until the budget was dealt with. I'm now passing over to members to see if there are questions from the members. Not seeing very many hands on the online platform, and I think for the colleagues here, as I see Member Nkondlo's hand has gone up. Over to you, Member Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get clarity on just two things. One is on the slide. I think it's 11 in my computer here on the provincial expenditure. I just want to understand the reference to the COE underspending of 310 in health and wellness. What does it include? And does the department, or it would be a question for a Department of Health, of how many are these jobs that are in the structure? If you can just explain that to me. And then I think on the previous slide, looking at the percentage spend, and I think the explanation given, which one understands, especially for those that are below 20% for quarter one spending, with transfers in the main, like treasury and local government. I'm making that assumption, but one may not necessarily be able to understand as it relates to police oversight, cultural affairs, and mobility. Is there particular big sort of transfers which are then done later to municipalities to justify or explain the below 20% spend of quarter one? Just wanted to understand that. And maybe lastly, Chair, I think on the infrastructure spend on the slide on the infrastructure, I just wanted to understand what is the difference, and that's why I'm not sure whether that one also needs the department in the categories, of maintenance and repairs, versus upgrading, and what is called triple R. I'm just perhaps not understanding what that is, so that one can better have an appreciation of what is meant by this, and just to say, if we consider what has been spent now, and with the colleagues that are in treasury from an infrastructure spending, would this means that more of the spending may come in the later quarters, such as either quarter two or quarter three? I'm just trying to understand, the spending pattern, of infrastructure, so that one has got a better understanding of reading what is here in terms of the current spend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. I see Member Masipa on the online platform, and then Member Boyson, who's with us here. Member Masipa, if you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Minister and your officials, in terms of the presentation of quarter one. The question that I'm going to put through is the question that I asked the Department of Agriculture when they presented their quarter one. And it relates to this conditional grants that arrived late. So in agriculture, you'll understand that the farmers who are recipient of these grants, they don't receive it in cash. They receive in terms of they provide with inputs, cost, and other equipment that they will normally use for their production. So since the arrival of the tranches of the grant was late, and farmers obviously proceeded in terms of planting and so forth. So the question is, how is the department or Treasury going to help farmers to be reimbursed from what they have really spent? Because I would assume that many of these farmers had to incur debt to do what they needed to do, and some might have not even planted for that matter. And I do not know if the Treasury will make a condonement to refund farmers who have incurred a certain debt in terms of really ensuring that they plant. Because as you know, the planting season came and passed, and the Treasury by that time could not really release the tranches of grants as a result of the issues that we know of at national level. Yeah, that's really the question, Chairperson. I hope it is clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Over to you, Member Boyson.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, one understands the offset between over expenditure and underspending, like in the case of health and wellness where I serve, but I'm sure the principle is the same for all the other committees. Does the department engage, because we've had engagements with the AG, and what I picked up in my committee, which is kind of a flag for me, irregular expenditure. Does Treasury engage with the departments in terms of trying to eliminate irregular expenditure, or is just a battle between the ministries and the AG only?
Thank you, Member Boyson. I'm just looking to see if there are any further hands. I'm not seeing that, so I'm handing over to you, Minister, and HOD.
Thank you. I'll just on a high level deal with two items, and then I'll hand over the team for the more detailed specifics. I'm not sure, Chairperson, if I understand Member Masipa's question properly, but I do remember that we received the money, the cash for agriculture for disaster funding that last I think it was that last week of the financial year, and that included the weekend. So there's no way for a person to be able to spend that amount of money in 2 working days on the last of the financial year, you know. But I'll ask the team just how we dealt with that and assisted the department in that regard. I'm not sure if I understand the second part of that question properly, Chair. Maybe if after the question and answer session, the member might want to either repeat it or if not, if they want to maybe put it in writing, we might be able to assist as well. On the health, I know that was page 10 of the report.
Sure.
Sorry.
I see Member Masipa, is your hand up?
Yeah, just to assist the minister, the conditional grant that I'm talking about is the CAS. 300 million was primarily for disaster, which obviously was applied to support the I think rehabilitation of infrastructure and support of some farmers that were really affected by the disaster. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Member Masipa.
Okay, thank you so much. The team will then be able to assist because that also dealt with the disaster money, but the team will go into more details for that. In terms of health, I know that, so I just want to make a distinguish quickly between forecasted over expenditure and over expenditure and over expenditure, overspending. Overspending, we'll know obviously when someone's definitely overspending after a financial year, and we don't allow overspending for your financial year. The forecasted overspending, we update through the departments, you update every month, every quarter, and then we come to the budget that based on what is currently happening in your budget, we are forecasting an overspending or we are forecasting an underspending. So it's not necessarily that the department will eventually underspend or overspend, but it is our almost like triggers to say to a department, based on what is currently happening in your budget, this is what likely will happen if you continue like this. And in the health section specifically, the recorded spending of 7.3 billion, representing obviously that 22.9%. The net overspending that was projected overspending is primarily driven by anticipated 580.27 million rand over expenditure on goods and services. So that's on the one side, and partially offset by an underspending on 310.726 million on compensation of employees. And then it goes further to say the underspending on COE is primarily attributed to the enduring impact of the Department of Public Service Administration Circular number 49 of 2003, related directives, modifications to the block advert policy mandated by DPSA, and high staff exits. These factors may potentially lead to increased surgery backlogs and an exacerbated burden of disease. And then the third bullet point deals with G&S, goods and services, over expenditures attributed to insufficient inflation adjustments that mostly deals with like medical, due to budget constraints coupled with soaring inflation on food, transportation, electricity, information technology, and higher medical inflation rates. Key cost drivers include property payments, medicine, agency and outsourced services, and computer services, amongst others. So it's without trying to simplify it too much, it means life became expensive. And everything that you buy is becoming more and more expensive on the one side. That's the different inflation items. But for the rest, I'm gonna hand over to the team in order to assist us with those items. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, through you, Chair. Before maybe Annalise Siat will pick up on the infrastructure, the detail around the CUSP. I just want to circle back in terms of Member Boyson's question around irregular expenditure and how we normally work within the Provincial Treasury with the departments. So from the start, we do the F's consistency workshop with departments and entities as a first step, and then we also indicate to departments where they're dealing with COMEFs that comes from the Auditor General, that they will then share those with us in terms of their responses. And if they do pick up particular challenges, they would normally ask us for an opinion. But that's also in addition to the condemnation working group that we have, where departments where they pick up issues around irregular expenditure will refer to the committee, and we will then apply the framework and provide written responses to departments. And those are the ones that they picked up. If the AG picks it up and there's a response to their COMEF, we will usually insist and engage with the department, with the Auditor General on these particular issues. Thanks.
So I'll kick off first in terms of, and I'm going to start with the information on slide 10. Oh no, apologies. Slide 11, that's where Member Nkondlo started. And that's on health and wellness there. And the question was about the projected underspending on compensation of employees. Now, what we saw especially for the financial year for health and wellness under COE for the 24-25 financial year is that they have exceeded in terms of historical norms in terms of attrition, meaning they've had large resignations of staff for the 24-25 financial year, meaning in terms of when you compared for 24-25 financial year where they started with a certain number of staff and where they ended off for the financial year, they lost for the 24-25 financial year over the 4 quarters for 24-25, they lost 1,546 staff for 24-25 alone. So, and that was a trend that was happening every quarter. And so what they then are saying in terms of in the first quarter, when they're looking at the first quarter, there is not in terms of an increase as in 24-25 because health has done a lot of work on trying to understand this phenomena. It's not only happening in the Western Cape Health Department, but it's also happening across the board for all 9 provinces. So they're seeing a higher than usual rate of staff resignations. Also, in terms of there is a DPSA circular that has modified block adverts in terms of how they have done the recruitment processes in previous years. Now that has also impacted and made recruitment even slower than before. That was all for 24-25. So for 25-26, the department has put some concerted effort into looking at in terms of how to improve efficiencies around recruitment, but then also then in terms of to try to improve and recruit at a faster rate than that they are losing staff. So at this stage, for the first time in 12 months, for the first quarter, they had 195 net increase in staff for the first quarter for 25-26. But the department is not sure whether this is just for the first quarter or whether they can statistically, in terms of consider this as a trend for the rest of the financial year. So what they've done, therefore, and if you're well aware in terms of health and wellness, that they are quite conservative in terms of some of their projections, is the fact that they've done a combination of what has happened in the first quarter, but then also taking into consideration 24-25. That's why they are still projecting an underspending on COE. Even though the first quarter they have managed to just about turn it around, like I said, about 195 net. I hope that explains in terms of and gives more detail on the COE on that question. Then on page or slide 10, quite rightly, member indicated in terms of, for example, police and oversight, community safety, there's 11.7% spend. Now, transfer payments to municipalities or makes up 50% of their budget. So, and that is mainly made up in terms of the LEAP program. And as I indicated, that in terms of the transfer payments were not, provinces in terms of the first quarter of their financial year do not necessarily make transfer payments in the last quarter of a municipal financial year. So on community safety, it's the LEAP project in terms of, because like I said, 50% of their budget goes there. Cultural affairs and sport, this is in terms of, again, if we remember, the library services grant also falls in cultural affairs and sport, makes up majority also of that budget. And therefore, that's the reason in terms of the slower spending. Around mobility, if we remember, the George integrated public transport also falls within mobility, which is a transfer payment to into a municipality. And then also, there's also in terms of a big transfer payment to GABS, and that's a public transport operations grant, which is about 1.2 billion rand of a 3.2 billion rand budget. So it's just a bit under half again of a budget. Again, it's a transfer payment, and that's the reason for the slower spending. Before I hand over to my colleague for the infrastructure explanations, I just in terms of wanted to speak about the conditional grant and just a bit more on the agriculture and some of the questions that Member Masipa asked. So quite rightly, as Minister also indicated, that we received in terms of the majority of the cost budget regarding the flood damage on the 26th of March. And so from in terms of from a prudent perspective, we feel in the province we did the right thing, and that is in terms of we did not even try to spend that funding in terms of within 1 day. If you take the weekend into consideration, it's 1 day. But Member Masipa's question was also asking in terms of when businesses have then incurred expenditure, but the department or CACIDRA hasn't necessarily transferred money to them, what then happens now? Now, this is in terms of a conditional grant. Therefore, in terms of there's a business plan, and if anything, in terms of if the funding that the farmers have incurred is in terms of the business plan, that funding can flow from CACIDRA in terms of as part of the project and implementing the project in terms of the business plan. I do not see any problem where that is concerned, unless there is in terms of extenuating circumstances that we're not aware of. But therefore, it does not require the condonement of the provincial treasury on this spending. It's either if it's in terms of the business plan and therefore it is allowed and that payment can go in terms of the farmers, or another option, because this is what Member Masipa was asking also, what are the options in terms of for the department? One of the options is in the adjustments budget to request the business plan then to be altered or to be adjusted in order for the national department that would need to then approve that business plan, and then perhaps in terms of to look at that kind of expenditure if it was not part of the original business plan. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Mr. Majid, in terms of the infrastructure.
Just to Member Mkondlo's question on the types of infrastructure investment. Maybe just to give a brief summary of the nature of investment. Upgrades and additions, this would be improvements made to increase the capacity or performance of an existing facility. So an example of this would be if the education department has an existing school and they want to build additional classrooms, this would be considered an upgrades and additions project. Rehabilitation, renovations, and refurbishment. The objective of a project like this would be to restore an asset to its original condition. So an example here is if there's an existing asset that has fallen into a complete state of disrepair and requires an overhaul, this would be considered an RRR project. Maintenance and repairs, these are regular activities, and these are just to ensure that an asset continues to perform as was originally intended. Thank you.
Member Barton.
Chair, I just want to add, because there was a part of it dealing with what if a farmer or someone had to go into debt, I think. If that is the case, then I would really encourage those particular stakeholders through their parent department, which is our Department of Agriculture, to then ask for an adjustment of those business plans, because those go through the conditional grants, and in order to request that, because the funding was received so late, to ask that National please assist with this particular matter, given that the delay was not at the provincial side. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Minister. I hope that helps there. Member Boyson.
Thank you once again, Chairperson. Again, in terms of what is transpired in the Health and Wellness Department, the number of these resignations, would we know whether the two-pot system are attributed to that?
Chair, Minister, or anyone can answer that?
I'll ask the team to deal with it, but so often you'll get that information also in the annual report per financial year, past financial year. But you can also ask it directly to Health and Wellness, because when you resign, some people will give you an answer as to why they're resigning, and some people won't necessarily give you an answer. But maybe that is something for the committee to even ask in terms of the pension funds, to try and find out, did people maybe give the pension funds reason for why did they resign, or whether there's been an increase in a particular sector, maybe in withdrawal of finances maybe. But if the team has more information, thank you.
What we are aware of is that the department has indicated they're going to be doing an in-depth study regarding, they're calling it a phenomenon. Like I said, we haven't seen this at all in the country. And they've then also agreed with the national sector is a fact that they would be doing in terms of some report, but we have not seen any as yet. I think we can understand, as Minister said, is the fact that they also need to look at all the audited figures for the entire 24-25 financial year. Before they can actually pinpoint in terms of just where the reasoning behind this.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just looking at both within the chamber here and on the platform if there are any further questions. I'm not seeing any hands at this stage. Okay, I think that's gone. So I think thank you very much to you, Minister, and to HOD and to your team for providing us the background on Q1. No doubt we are at the end of Q2 now. That is today. So, we in due course will obviously look forward to getting that briefing as well. And thank you very much for the presentation that you've given us, the detail and the information that you have, as well as naturally for Piero. And I think being the quarter in, I guess you've probably got a few things that you might still want to do this afternoon. So we're happy to release you at this stage. Thank you very much for being with us and the presentations. The committee will then just remain, and we will then deal with resolutions and recommendations as well as minutes from previous meeting. Thank you, colleagues. It's been a fairly lengthy meeting, and I think we expected it to be a fairly lengthy meeting. So I think we just need to deal with what we've dealt with today, which has been a report of the Budget Committee on the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook 2025, dated Tuesday, 30 September 25, as follows: that the Budget Committee, having considered the subject of the Western Cape Government Provincial Economic Review and Outlook 2025, referred to it, reports that it has concluded its deliberations. So that I think it deals in effect with the resolution and on the Bureau at this stage. I don't know if there are any comments on that from the members. And if we can adopt that, if we can have someone there agreeing to adopt from the membership. The permanent members.
Yeah.
That I see member Masipa and I see member Nkondlo.
I ask that we adopt the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, member Masipa. Member Nkondlo.
Chair, what are we adopting? Are we adopting that the payroll was presented to the budget committee? Is that what you're asking? I didn't get that.
Yes, that in effect has been presented to us, and what I think I'm just checking here.
Okay, Chair, can I think reiterate my suggestion earlier on?
Yes.
To really request that as we go to the mayor on reports of this nature, can we at least be given them a week before? And if it is possible for the speech of the minister, I know we may not necessarily be given it immediately, but it helps to get this information so that we don't seem to be, asking questions that may, sound foolish. Because if we're able to read and then we get to be referred to pages of a book that we only received at the time that the presentation was made. So if we could just ask that the department helps us, even if just get the booklet and then find the speech and the presentations can actually be given to us as and when. But it helps, but I would support having us received the report of having received the payroll.
Yeah. Yes, thanks. I'm sure Mr. Davids will phrase that, and we can. I'll certainly take that up with Minister to see to what extent we can do it. But I think what we should do is, if there are questions that do come up, because I think, as you correctly say, I think the Bureau runs to about 180 pages, I suppose. And, certainly I think all the members will no doubt use this as bedtime reading for the next week, and then are likely to have some further questions. So I think let us work on that basis, that members can submit further questions, and then we'll do them in a bundle and try and deal that at a future meeting then. So I'm more than happy to do that, because I'm sure all of us will have further issues that will come out of this. So we'll certainly look at that so that we can get those responses. Then on the briefing on the first quarter, are there any resolutions and recommendations that we perhaps want to take from there? I see Member Masipa.
Thank you, Chair. I think my resolution will be for the first report. Sorry, I thought we were still on the first report, on the marrow. So I asked a question that relates to the female health.
You're not very clear there, Member Masipa.
Can you hear me?
We're not hearing what you're saying. Can you just speak a little bit more distinctly there, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
Yes. Okay. So what I just wanted to ask is that we received, obviously, in the report that a female-headed household, as a result of men's health and so forth, dying early and so forth. So I'm just worried that, we might be having a population increase that is state dependent. And maybe, we need to really maybe ask that insight to be really shared so that, us as members of parliament can really engage this kind of finding to see how best can we really support in terms of really ensuring that some of these factors that affect men and who are living, female headed households, is reduced. Because my just fear is that, the dependence on state is just going to increase if we don't address some of these issues. So maybe, the insight that we can get, a proper briefing focused on this particular aspect might help us, in terms of really the health maybe team can take this matter and deal with some of the issues that are coming from that particular insight. I hope I'm clear, Chair.
Member Masipa, look, I think we picked up some of it, and Member Mr. Davids will sort of read out what he has jotted down here. But I think if you could perhaps put that in writing as well, it would help, so that we could, get some form of clarity on what you've intended or intend for us to try and take forward. It will also give us an opportunity to read the document here and get a better idea exactly of what's been dealt. Is that fine? Mr. Davids, can you perhaps just read that out, that what you've interpreted so far?
Chairperson, I will later on consult the hands-on of this meeting, but what I've just free-handed to the chair is basically from Member Masipa's referring or talking out of the payroll presentation about the female-headed households, and there's a concern that this concept could be dependent on the state, heavily dependent on the state. And one of the questions of Member Masipa is to receive a briefing on how this phenomenon of female-headed households being dependent on the state, or the risk of being dependent on the state, can be best supported by the province.
Fine. Thank you. I don't know if Member Masipa, is that what you intended there? I don't see.
Yes.
I don't see Member Masipa on the platform. Yeah, but I think what Mr. Davids will also consult Hansard, and then if need be, we'll come back to you. Thank you for that. does that conclude the PRO aspect of the briefings today? I don't see any contrary hands. So can we then move to the first quarter results? Okay, can that, in effect, that we have then received the first quarter results, and that the resolution will be on that basis? Fine, thank you for that. I think that's that. And then the next aspect is dealing with the minutes of the 22nd of August, if I remember correctly, which was the meeting at which we received the Financial and Fiscal Commission's presentation relating that they provided to the province in dealing with their view and the data-driven recommendations that they have in relation to the upcoming national budget and the Division of Revenue Act. The conclusion we came to at that stage and what was minuted was that we then possibly look at how we could have a parliamentary sitting relating to that matter. What has taken place in the meantime in discussions that I've had with the procedural officer is that we will be inviting the Bureau of Economic Research from the University of Stellenbosch and or the Impulelo Growth Lab to make a presentation on what they believe are some of the issues that need to be dealt with in the forthcoming budget to promote economic growth. And I think we are aiming to have that briefing on the 7th of November. And then at that same meeting, inviting Provincial Treasury also to provide some of their views on how we as a province need to motivate for additional funding from national, in terms of the national budget, from National Treasury, and also to deal with spending. Now this also then ties up with a number of the comments that you as members made today. And what we then are proposing is that following shortly after the 7th of November, that we then have a further meeting of the Budget Committee where we are then able to develop our resolutions or recommendations, which we would then want to forward to the Speaker. So that is the proposal going forward on how we handle that. And the minutes as such are, and I'll just repeat the resolutions and the actions in 4.1. The committee resolved that it will request from the Speaker that the parliamentary sitting be held where the Budget Committee will provide inputs into the 26-27 Division of Revenue Bill. I'm just looking at Mr. Davids. Are you happy that we still take that resolution? Because that was the outcome of that meeting. And if members are find that acceptable, then it's a matter of approving these minutes. Over to you, members. I think the members that are are permanent who are in Beto are probably considering their luncheon at this stage. Members Bryant, Masipa, who are,
Yes, Chairperson, we're here. What do you require?
we're just asking for the approval of the minutes of the 22nd of August. I see Member Nkondlo's hand.
Yes, Chair. I wanted to move for the adoption of the minutes.
Sorry, you're proposing the
move.
adoption.
Yes,
Thank you.
Chair.
Member
I can
Bryant.
second for you, Chair.
Okay, and Member Beatrice?
Second, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think for those of you who are in Beto and have a public hearing tonight, thank you very much. I think you can continue with your lunch. And I think that then brings our budget meeting to a conclusion. Thank you. Yes, we will also have a meeting on Friday. I think as members are aware that we have the AG. I think we need to obviously be in attendance for that meeting. Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.